Welcome to Documentary Storytelling Part 3. This is the final part in our three-part series titled Documentary Storytelling, and today we'll be focusing on post-production. This is going to be the final stage in the process where the film comes together. I shared this quote in our previous courses. Marketing is no longer about the stuff that you make, but about the stories you tell. In the ministry sector, it's going to read, marketing is no longer about your services or statistics, but about the stories you tell. The stories of your beneficiaries' transformed lives are powerful, far more powerful than a video that talks about your ministry's history and stats or strategies. It's time to start telling the stories that show how God is working to transform lives through your ministry. Those stories are going to engage your audience with more power than any other story. We've worked through the pre-production and production stages of our documentary storytelling process, and now we've arrived at the post-production stage. This is where all the hard work comes together. If you are a national partner or a missionary who might have shipped your content off to ministry headquarters at this point to handle the editing process, then you don't have to pay attention to this course. If you are a ministry and at ministry headquarters and content has been delivered and you're ready to start putting that together, this is going to be a helpful course for you. If your national partners have followed the structure up to this point, then your job placing content into the outline structure should be pretty simple. This course should be pretty quick. Although the editing process can take a significant amount of time to execute, there's not much time required to teach the basics of the process. And that's what we're teaching in this course, is the basics of the process. If we wanted to get technical, we could, but I think that that will only serve to confuse. So the goal of these courses is to simplify the production process so that we can begin creating content at scale and with high levels of output and regularity. So if we get too technical, that's going to only serve to defeat the purpose of these courses. Now, as you perfect what we teach in these courses and in this course, you can then begin researching various editing techniques and theories in order to increase your creativity and knowledge about the editing process. We can get way down in the weeds on the editing process, and so there's plenty of content to research on that, but I want to focus on the primary things you're going to need to know in order to keep this process simple. I'm also not going to spend any time teaching video editing software in this course. There are endless how-to videos on YouTube that can help you guys understand the inner workings of Adobe Premiere, Final Cut, or iMovie. This course will simply lay out our post-production process in its most simple form. So if you have other questions, it's an easy Google and YouTube search away to find the answers that you need specific to the editing softwares I just listed. All right, so we've got our content from the field. We've offloaded the content onto a hard drive with backups, and now you've got your content in your editing software of choice. The first thing you want to do is start rough cutting your interview footage. Lay the interview footage on the timeline and cut it up each in the separate question and answer points in the interview. Because you followed our documentary interview question resource during the interview, your questions should follow in order of the hero's journey structure. If some of the questions got out of order, make sure that the questions and their answers are laid out on the timeline according to the hero's journey structure we outlined in the pre-production course and many of our other courses. Remember, the structure goes as follows. A character has a problem, they meet a guide who calls them to action and gives them a plan that results in transformation and change that they apply to their life. Your film should follow this structure, and your interview or your narrative, depending on which kind of documentary style you choose, will be the piece that drives the storyline according to this structure that we've laid out throughout these courses. You'll also want to remember to remove the questions at this stage in the process. Remember, you should have had your interview answer the questions, or your interviewee answer the questions by repeating the question. Now that you're in the editing process, you should know what question was asked by the answer that was given. rather than from hearing the question itself. Once you've assembled your interview content, we can move to overlapping your B-roll and your drama or recreation scenes on top of the interview answers. Place the B-roll on top of the interview questions that match the B-roll or the drama scenes. This is still a rough cut and assembly process. There shouldn't be any fine editing taking place at this stage in the process. You also might find that you have B-roll that applies and fits to multiple parts of the interview. It's okay to copy that B-roll and apply it to multiple sections of the interview. You can decide in the editing process what B-roll fits best, but for now, feel free to lay the same B-roll footage on top of multiple interview pieces. Lastly, lay down the audio for the film and match your natural sounds to your B-roll. You can also rough lay your music at this stage in the process. Your music might change in the editing process, but you can at least lay down music according to where you think it'll fit best. Once you've got your footage assembled and organized on your timeline, you can start the editing process. And at the end of the day, the editing process is an organization and removal of content. You will not and cannot use everything you created in the production process. The pre-production process is partly designed to alleviate some of the extra unnecessary fluff, but you're still going to get rid of a good portion of what you shot. The goal in the editing process is to tell the story you want to tell in the most efficient way possible. As you cut up your interview, focus your close-up shots during the areas of the interview where you want to portray the most emotion and intimacy with the audience. As you walk through and edit your B-roll, find the balance between your close, medium, and wide shots. For example, if you filmed someone cooking and preparing a meal, keep the movement in the film going as you cut between wide, medium, and close-up shots. Unless you have a reason to linger on a particular shot, move from one shot to the next fairly quickly. A couple of tips to keep in mind while you edit. You can make edits and cuts on a variety of moments in your film. You can make edits and cuts on action. Say your interviewee moves their head or hand abruptly. That action can be a great time to cut. You can make an edit or a cut on dialogue, either at the end of a sentence or maybe on the strong pronunciation of a word. You can make an edit or a cut on beat changes in music. That's why it's helpful to have your music roughly laid out in the assembly stage. Now, some higher production films will end up creating a specific score or specific music track for the film. And in that case, the music won't come until after the editing process is complete. But in most instances where the audience of this video is concerned, that's not going to be the case. Custom scores for films can be incredibly expensive. Some things you'll want to avoid and take note of. Unless you're making a film that's specifically going to land on YouTube, avoid making jump cuts. Jump cuts are where you cut and edit out gaps in the interview conversation and connect the interview footage so it looks like the interview jumps from one sentence to the next. It can be an abrupt and jarring thing to see for the viewer. This is where the role of B-roll shines. B-roll was designed to cover up those jump cuts in an interview. Jump cuts in your interview are fine as long as they get covered up by B-roll, or if you're creating a YouTube vlog type piece of video content. And if that's the case, much of what we've discussed in this documentary course becomes irrelevant anyways. As you work through your edit, just keep in mind that the role of editing process is to cut and remove anything that doesn't support the story you're trying to tell. Even if you have to remove one of your favorite shots from your production process, remove it if it doesn't serve the story well. For filmmakers, this can be the most difficult thing to do. We've worked hard in the production process and we want to keep the coolest and most creative shots. But if they don't serve to support the story, it shouldn't be in the film. Think about movies like John Carter, Battleship, or Pacific Rim. Incredibly visually stunning movies that did a poor job of telling a story. Beautiful shots are great, and they can serve our films really well, but only if they serve the story first. We have to always think about the story first. Once your film is edited and cut together, Once you've got your music and your audio finalized, then you can start on the last piece of the editing process, and that is color correction and color grading. Color correction is the process by which you walk through all of the shots in your film and correct things like black levels, exposure, contrast, and white balance. You want to make sure that all of your footage is consistent throughout the entire film in the process. Color grading is where you will make changes to atmosphere and tone. If your film establishes a problem or a need at the beginning of the film, the color grade during that part of the film might look dark and gritty. Once the film turns and starts discussing the hope or the transformed life, the color grade might be more bright and clean. The color grade is going to help visually support the emotion taking place in the story. In the same way music can be used to give the audience feelings of tension or fear in a scary movie, color grading can visually pull emotion out of the viewer without the viewer even noticing. And the last piece of the puzzle is feedback and critique. Once you've finished editing the first draft of your film, export the film and send it to your friends and family and all of the creatives that you know. Ask them to give you feedback. Ask them to critique the film and make recommendations for how the film might be better. Now, you might get feedback on things that you can't change, and that's okay. It can also be a painful process to ask for critique. You've worked hard on this film and put a lot of time up to this point. Asking someone to give their opinion can be difficult, but it's a helpful process and will serve to help develop and make the final results stronger. If you want to avoid feedback on things you can't change, ask the people you share the film with to focus on key elements of the film to critique. Give them specifics on what to focus on and look for. For example, ask them if there's a good balance between interview shots and B-roll. What do you think of the color grading? Did you feel that there was a nice balance between the conflict in the story and the hope? Did the film feel too long or too short? Did you feel like it had missing information, or was there enough communicated in the film to get the message across? Ask them what they felt the moral of the story was, or the message they think you were trying to portray. If it's not obvious, you might need to revisit the questions you're asking in the interview, or revisit how much of the interview you included in your final film. Filmmaking is very similar to photography in that you only can learn so much from courses and educational content like this. The real talent comes when you actually start practicing shooting and editing content together. It takes practice. It takes time investment. But it's critical that we learn how to tell the stories of how God is moving globally through our ministries. First, for His glory, and for our ministry's sake. We have to communicate where audience attention is. And more, audience attention continues to focus on video. We need to storytell well in that space if we want our ministries to see marketing success. All right, now that we've walked through the post-production process, I want to share a quick screen share that our video lead, Max, created for us. This is a recent project that he wrapped up, and hopefully this will give a good representation of the entire post-production process. Now, this is by no means exhaustive, and it doesn't go into any how-to training. It's just designed to serve as a visual representation of what the post-production process can look like from assembly to final export. Now, I will say, before you take a look at this, that Max's project is far more in-depth and much more complicated than what we have taught in this course. Your post-production layout won't look this complicated on your first handful of projects. Max is a seasoned and experienced videographer, so his projects are high production value, and they might look intimidating to someone just starting out. So my hope is simply just to give a quick visual showing a rundown of the post-production process or stage. So with that said, let's take a look at Max's process.
All right, so this is kind of generally how I lay out projects. It doesn't normally look like this because I use two monitors, so I never really edit like this. But over here, make that bigger. This is kind of the general project organization, footage, just various assets, After Effects projects, sound effects, and then all the sequences that I use. Um, Here in this is kind of the full interview that I lay out on a timeline, and then in this particular project, it was all in Spanish, so I had to go by the time codes of the translations that we got, and so I just kind of read through that transcript, highlighted stuff, and then that I thought would be good quotes to include, and then went through and found it in the interview and just pulled it up to um, the second layer of the timeline there and just color coded it to kind of keep track of what I thought might work for the video. And then I pulled all of those into their own sequence and just kind of did big block text to copy over all the translation stuff so that I could just reference it. And then once I was actually cutting up the interview to put in the piece, I would figure out specifically where the sentence breaks were and stuff and reference the transcription. But for this stage, it's just helpful to have it all kind of laid out in one spot. And then in this particular project, I did actually just a visual cut. So I just went through and kind of pulled B-roll selects essentially and tried to tell the story purely with visuals. So it's all very rough, set to music, just kind of cut to the beat and tried to see what all footage I had. So then it went through kind of a progression of different cuts where I was bringing in dialogue, and these are all pretty big files, so computer struggles to catch up. But yeah, just kind of experimenting with the layout and the flow. And this was based on a written script that I'd started to flesh out, and then I just kind of start placing things and see if the script works out in reality or not. So this is the first cut. All the visuals are pretty roughed in. So then I just kind of go through a series of cuts, and this one you can see I'm starting to put in lower thirds, and these After Effects files are the red tiles. I've got music placed a little more intentionally. So then eventually, these are just kind of variations of the cuts. Eventually we get to this, which is essentially my final export. So I've got all the interview tracks here. Actually, I outlined it a little bit better in this one. Got all my interview tracks here, sound effects on these tracks, and then music on these. And in this particular project, I graded it all in DaVinci Resolve. So each clip comes out as a ProRes file that then I layer on top of the original edit and copy over some of the effects to make sure it all looks good to go. So then this is what I use for the final export.
Now, we shared this in our previous two courses, but this is the very documentary storytelling process that we have outlined in these courses and the process that we follow when we create films for our ministry partners. It's the very same process World Vision followed when they created the film that they're going to be releasing shortly that I think will change ministry storytelling forever. I think it's going to transform the way ministries tell and communicate through video for the next generation. Like all of our other content, I've made this document available on our website for free, so there's no excuse not to use the resource. Please download it, use it to your advantage. It's going to help you in this process. Please take advantage of this document. It will simplify the entire video making process and give you a structure to follow. Print it out, keep it with you, keep it in your camera bag as you go and create content. It's going to bring clarity to your video storytelling and documentary storytelling process, and just make a huge difference in your final production. And I've linked to the PDF version of the document you just saw on the last slide. So if you're working through this course with the presentation deck, you can click on this link on this button here, and it'll take you to the resource online. You can also go to reliantcreative.org, and down in our footer we have the downloadable resources page where you can find the document as well. And that is all I have for you guys today. These are some great resources for the content I've shared today. Again, none of the stuff I've shared with you is my own, and a lot of what we discuss comes from the resources shown on this slide. I believe you'll have access to this deck, so please feel free to continue researching the things that we've discussed today. YouTube is a great resource for all things video, photography, anything that we've discussed today. And if at any point you have additional questions or need help telling your stories or designing communication strategies and content, websites that have purpose and engaging structure, we are happy to help. This is what we do at Reliant, and we're always looking for new ministry partners to partner with and support. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to learn about the post-production process. Please, again, don't hesitate to ask if you have any questions. We've said this before 1,000 times, but this is our ministry. This is the way we are using our skills, talents, and abilities for the kingdom. So please grant us the opportunity to pour into you so we can tell the stories of how God is working with greater efficiency and effectiveness. Thank you, guys.